All right.
Okay.
All right, great. So what I have on my instance, which is slightly different than yours, is I'm not using the cloud version. I have my local environment. So I have a local installation of BPM Online. So you could see in the address bar that I'm going to a local host. That's my computer name. And everything is hosted on my laptop. So I'm not dependent on the cloud instance. Now that's for administration and customization, it's not very critical to be using your local host. However, it's recommended, especially if you're going into heavy customizations. It is always recommended to have an environment. So what I have is a demo stand, just like you would get. There is absolutely no licenses added to it. It's a simple environment with a limit of, I believe, 1,000 records, which should be sufficient for us to cover all the examples. In the very first
May
configuration,
I,
yep.
can you please slow down while you're talking because the voice is not that high quality.
Oh, okay. Hold on, let me just make sure. I am on a good network, and that's strange. All right, I'll try to slow down.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the first thing that we need to do when we're logging in into the system, the very first thing is I need you to go into the profile, under your profile in the top right corner in the notification panel here. And in the profile, I need you to choose the date and time format and the time zone for which you're going to be located. When the system is first loading, there's going to be two blanks here. So I've chosen English Canada and Helsinki for my time zone. Please do your appropriate time zone, whatever is convenient for you. Is my microphone just quiet, or is it actually choppy?
It can do for now. It's good.
Okay. Let me just see if I can figure out the volume. Okay. All right. So this is going to be the first customization that we need to do. The second one that I would like you to do right away is go into the call center parameter setup. It's this button right here, call center, and disable all call center integration. What this is allows us to receive telephone calls into the system. Since we don't have that configured yet, or we're not going to be configuring it in this tutorial, so I would like you to disable this integration so we're not getting any errors, and then just save. Once you apply those settings, those are user-specific settings. All we need to do is we need to exit and log back into the environment.
Hi, Kirill. This is Danilo.
Hi, Danilo.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What about the other options? Auto connection, use web phone, some notification. Should we?
You don't really need to. Once you disable notification, it automatically disables all those options. It's just simply not going to be reacting to any events, checking for it, checking for webhooks. There's really nothing for us to do. It just, in my particular instance, I uncheck those, but you don't have to.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, great. So now that we've done this this part, what we just configured is we've configured a time zone for our local user. Now there is another setting that I would like you to do, and that's going to affect the entire installation of the system. It's regarding the time zone. The time zone is figured in a couple of ways. First, we're trying to grab the time zone from most authoritative source, and that's going to be a user profile. If that's not available, we're going to go into a system setting and grab a default time zone for the entire installation. If that setting is not set, then we're going to grab it from the IIS basically place where it's installed. So all your installations, I believe, in Virginia, so it's going to pick up whatever the IIS time zone is in Virginia. If that's not what we want to do, then we need to go into system setting and modify the default time zone. To do that, we need to go into the admin area. The admin area is going to be our friend. And so let's go into the system designer, scroll down to system settings, find the system setting, and in the system setting, we're going to search for, under filter, default time zone. Oops. Default time zone. Open the setting, and under default time zone, same thing, choose the one that works for you. So I'll choose Helsinki for myself. Now, when these settings are correctly configured, the system will now know how to schedule our meetings, how to write the logs correctly. So everything will work just much better, and it will make a lot more sense. Okay, so this is the very basic stuff. Everything that we're going to be doing in the system, I'm going to try to save and then provide you with the package that you can import into your own system after we're done. So as part of this 3-day training, I'm going to be showing you various things, and I'm going to try to save all these changes into one big folder that you can later install, just like you would install an application from the intranet. In order for us to install the application from the intranet, we're going to go into a cogwheel. It's another shortcut to go to a system designer. And at the bottom of the, not at the bottom, sorry, at the application, like kind of halfway through the page, you'll see installed applications. From here, we'll be able to install new applications. And that's something that I will show you at the very end of our training, day 3, when everything is going to be saved. I'll show you how you can simply install an application. Whatever I'm doing on my screen, you will be able to pull into your system just in case you want something to go back onto. Now, what I've done so far is I've said that all configuration, all the settings that we're going to be making are going to be stored in a particular package. So let's go into a package designer, and I'll try to briefly introduce you to how things are stored in the system. So you may know that we have main components in the system. So the first one is going to be obviously the web browser. That's what you're looking at. The persistent data storage is going to be Microsoft SQL. We do support.
Yeah, just to ask a question about the application installment.
Okay.
Let's say, for example, our technical team has already installed the application on one of the PCs we have, okay? Mm-hmm. But it gives us the 10 licensee, right?
Okay.
When it comes to the sign-in. And then we need to install another application if we're using the mobile application, right?
No, that's not how it works. What we have, what I refer to an application is basically an enhancement to your installed instance. So you all have BPM Online. Now, the BPM Online will have different capabilities, right? So somebody will maybe design
I know. Some optimization and licensing differences.
Yes. So if you want to install this application on your particular instance, then yes, you have to install it on one instance. There is another way of doing it through SVN. That's going to be covered in the development. For us, it's not very important. It's a little bit more difficult. But I will provide you with the file at the end of the training that you will be able to simply drop into BPM Online, install it, and everything is going to work for you.
That's what you do to install applications.
Okay.
This is also going to be a preferred way for you to move the your packages or to move your enhancements from the development environment into your production or testing. That's how you would do it. It's one of the ways, right? If you're not using SVN. Okay, so let's take a look now. We're in the System Designer. So System Designer Cogwheel. Personally, I constantly go to Cogwheel. And let's go into this advanced setting. The advanced setting, I'm just basically showing you a few very important components of the system right now that we're going to be going to all the time. So when you open this guy up, it's going to open up in the new browser window. So make sure that your pop-up window is enabled, and then you can load this page. So sometimes you'll get a notification on the right saying that it's preventing pop-up. When you're in this pop-up blocker, when you open this screen, you're going to have 3 tabs. So the access rights, configuration, and the changelog. Access rights will be used to configure permissions, access to objects, access to data, etc. Changelog is going to be configuration for our audit log and how we're tracking whatever changes we're making in the database itself. And configuration is going to be a list of packages or list of enhancements and various other things that we need in order to install those applications or design our own. So what I've done is I've created a package called Academy. A package is a self-sustaining collection of items, files, JavaScripts, database modifications, etc., that basically provide an additional functionality. All the packages, they have an inheritance model. So all the packages inherit from something. Currently, what you probably have in your system, let me try to find this. It's going to be a package custom. This guy is going to be on the top. It's going to be bold, and it's going to have an asterisk by the at the right. Just like Academy for me with the asterisk at the right now, you probably have custom at the right now. What you can do is you can click.
I'm confused here. I see too many columns and I feel that I have lost the track. Can you just repeat it in a more simple way?
I have created an Academy package where I will save everything that we're doing in this 3-day training. What you have is you have a custom package where everything is going to be stored. The package is a place where we're going to be saving absolutely everything into. Make sense?
Okay, so it's some kind of a backup, right?
It's not a backup. It's basically, think of it as like a binary file, like some sort of something that you can distribute to other systems, something that provides an additional functionality that previously did not exist in the basic version that you all been provided with.
Okay.
Okay. So in my particular custom package, Academy, if I click on it and I right click on the edit, I will be able to see what's called a dependency. I am dependent on marketing, sales, service, and web form. So those are the 4 main things that will provide pretty much access to everything within the system. So they're very top level. We can look at the package dependencies a little bit later when we get to the packages. What I want you to know right now is that everything we're doing is going to be saved here. Now, if you want to create your own, what you would need to do is you would need to click anywhere here on the right-hand side, click Add, create your own package, give it a name, give it a description if you so choose, and then if you're using version control, which you will learn how to do in later classes, you will provide a version control to some sort of a folder on SVN, and here we will list dependencies. The other thing that I've done is very important, is in the system settings, right here, where we were, let's look for package. So we have current package. If you look into your settings right now, your current package is going to say custom. My current package says Academy. So when I've created a new one, here I'm providing system, let it know that save everything into the Academy package. That's number 1. And then there is going to be a prefix. Prefix for object name. That's another setting. In your case, it is going to be USR. In my case, it's ACDM, that stands for Academy. Now, the prefix we're going to be using for every object that we're creating in the system, and the reason we need it is just so we can differentiate between various hierarchies of installation. So I'll explain it in a little bit better a little bit later, but for now just know that when I have ACDM, you're probably going to have USR. So just so that there is no confusion in terms of what we're going to be using, the naming convention for our files. Everything else stays the same. Okay. So in the next couple of days, what we're going to be spending time on is I'm going to try to build with you a very basic customization, and we'll call it an expense report. We will be able to file the report, put some details into it, apply some header information, so set the dates, etc., etc. Maybe we're going to send it for approval. We're going to attach a couple of business processes. We're going to attach a logging facility to it, and we're going to attach, obviously, access permissions to it to make sure that not everyone can access it, but only a few select people who have who've been allowed to do that. So that's going to be kind of in the back of our head, what we're going to be trying to achieve here in the next couple of days. Now, if you have any questions or if you have any recommendations, you want to see something a little bit different, then let me know. By all means, if we can implement it as part of the training, I'll try to accommodate that. If not, then maybe I'll get back to you outside the training, right? So if you have any questions, feel free to ask now. If it's outside the training, then I'll just answer you by email. Okay. So let me ask you a quick question. Like, how many of you are familiar with the functionality of the product? How many of you are familiar with the entity model, with how the data is laid out, where it's all sitting, and all that type of stuff? How many of you can build filters, put it this way?
I think mainly me, because I was in touch with all the customer project managers, and I have with 2 traders, the cloud one, the cloud version, and the on-premise version, and also and I was the touch point with the project manager since day 1. So okay, I think that the team not familiar with the functionality, they cannot even find the way to put the filter, how to edit it, how to create a lead, etc.
Okay, great, fantastic. So you have some familiarity. I'm going to try to use examples that don't really depend on the existing functionality of the system, but from time to time we may need to refer to it. Okay, great. So the first order of business for us is going to be creating a couple of our users and maybe creating a group of users and trying to manage them and administer them in a way that we can grant permissions and create some sort of a workplace for all of the people to live together, right? So on the left-hand side, where I have general, it's called a workplace. The general workplace is usually used by system administrators simply because it has a, studio is usually used by system administrators, and that's simply because it provides a shortcut to things like process library and the process log, and then the web services, lookups, and system users, and things of that nature. So it's not something that your typical user would use. However, for sysadmin, it's quite important to know to have access to this stuff. So let's go ahead and try to create a couple of new users, create a couple of groups, and pretend that they're all located, let's say, in different parts of the world, and they all require to have access to different things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the cog wheel, and we're going to go through the front. In the cog wheel, when in doubt, always click on the cog wheel. You'll probably find most of the stuff. And here you have system users. When we click on the system users, you'll see that you have three. Currently, it's Mandrill, Supervisor, Sysportal Connection. So those are system users. Please do not delete Supervisor because you will not be able to get back into the system easily. So this guy needs to stay. If you want to change, you can change the password, but please don't delete it. When we're trying to create a user, first thing we need to know is that the user can only be associated with an existing contact. So the contact has to exist prior to us creating a username. So let's go ahead into general, let's go into contacts and create a couple of users, which we will later use in our groups. Let's create a new contact. I'm going to create the first contact and I'm going to save it. And maybe I'm going to create another one. I'm going to put my wife there. And now I have two new contacts, and that would be sufficient for me to go ahead and create a couple of users. So I'm going to go back into the system designer. I'm going to go back into the system users. I'm going to create a new company employee. Now, the important thing here is that we don't jump into portal user. The portal user and the company employee, they are totally separate nodes of the hierarchy tree. If you put somebody as a portal user, you cannot use them as the company employee and vice versa. So make sure that you are putting them in the right place. So let's go ahead and create a company.
What can we use portal user for?
Pardon me?
What examples we can use portal user for?
Portal user is somebody who can access the system from the outside. So maybe your customers, maybe your suppliers. If you're allowing people to submit tickets from the outside, or maybe you want them to submit some other forms from outside, provide them partial access to the system. This is what you would use portal for.
We don't need it.
No, I don't think it's the feature we're looking for, but anyway.
Okay. All right. So, yeah.
Where did we go to set up this new record?
We went to Cogwheel, System Designer, and then we went to System Users.
So we've created a couple of those contacts.
Yes, we've created two new contacts. We've created Kirill and Judy.
Yep.
Is simply in a contact. We did not do anything else to them. And then we went to System Users, and I'm about to create a new user.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So let's go into System Users. Let's create new company employee. And as a company employee, I'm going to look for Kirill. It's going to show up here. I can look on the through magnifying glass, but just this way it's easier. Now, here's a couple of options. I can provide username and password, or I can integrate with Active Directory or some sort of service that speaks LDAP. I obviously don't have anything configured right now for LDAP, so I'm going to provide basically authentication with our VPM Online. If you wanted to configure it to talk to your Active Directory, we have to make some modifications to your system. You need to provide us basically with access to your folders and access to your organizational units, and then we can pull the users from there. It's fairly straightforward approach, but nonetheless, we have to be able to log into your AD and be able to sync the records with them. Okay, so here I need to provide the username and I need to provide the password. So I'm going to use I'm going to use username like this, and I'm going to put super secure password 123, and I'm going to save this record. I'm going to go and create another company employee. Oops, it's a Judy.
Who has the right to create the contacts here?
Pardon me?
Who has the right or the authority to create the contacts here?
A supervisor. I am logged in as a supervisor. I am in the supervisor group and I have access to do all that stuff.
Do we have two supervisors user or one supervisor user?
Yes, the demo stands that you've been provided with, you can log in as a supervisor, and that will give you full unrestricted access to the system.
Like you mean the super admin?
Pardon me?
The super admin user, you mean?
Yeah, supervisor is the administrator.
I think the question is, Krill, can we have two admins?
Yes, you can. You cannot have two supervisors. A user has to have a different username. However, you can put them into a system administrator group, and then they will inherit the supervisor access.
Okay. The other question is, with those passwords, you know, like we've said, 1, 2, 3, can you have password for that?
Yes, we can. So in order for us to modify that, we need to go out of here. Let's go back into system settings. And under system settings, we have passwords.
Oh, yeah.
And here you can set the password complexity rules. So similar to what you would set in Active Directory. So for how many symbols, how many special characters, uppercase, lowercase, etc., etc. And most importantly, you can set for how many days it needs to be reset, things like that, right? So you can set up a very complicated rules if you really needed to. If you are going to be setting that up, maybe consider integrating with your Active Directory. But for sake of this example, I just 1, 2, 3 is good enough for me. It's a local host; nobody can have access to it anyway.
And what's the default user locking time in the system?
You mean the session or?
Yeah, well, I think that's what this is, isn't it?
The 15 period. Yeah. So
no, this is the other one.
Yeah, it's 15 credentials, and I think the default in web config for session is 20 minutes.
Okay.
So if you can bump it up, like if you have a local installation, you can go into web config and you can find that session time. If you are in the cloud, then you basically send a request to tech support and they bump it up to whatever the value you want it to be.
So the bottom line is that the system in itself can go up whatever complexity, whatever, you could change as much as you want, really.
That's right. That's right. That's the idea.
Great.
Okay. So this is again, this is a system setting. You could see that they're broken down into folders. So some of the folders will contain most of the information related to whatever we're doing. So if we're synchronizing, let's say with Active Directory, then there's going to be a bunch of settings that we need to take here. We have a wizard specifically designed for LDAP, but all the settings are eventually going to end up here in the system storage, right? There's a little bit of administration on top of it that has to do with the audit log. And when we get to the audit log, then we'll review what kind of permissions we can or cannot basically log in our system, right? But for now, let's just go back to creating users, and then as we need these settings, I will be pointing them out. Now let me go back into system users. Okay, so now I've got these two new system users. And let's switch to this little icon. So this icon provides me with organizational roles. So the organizational role, and then next to it is the functional role. That's a functional role. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between them. So the organizational role, if you can think of just a simple hierarchy, of the organization. So let's say CEO or directors on top, and then you've got the VPs, and then you've got the department heads, and then you've got the regular workers, right? So you've got a very structured top-down organization. Then the organizational rule is probably good enough. If, on the other hand, you have maybe multiple locations that share the same kind of a functional role. So for example, you've got accountant in US, you've got accountant in Europe, and then you've got accountant in Asia. You guys all need to have access to the same information or have access to the same objects, then that's going to be a functional role. It's not necessarily an organizational role, right? So we can group people either organization or by function that they're performing within the system. It doesn't matter how we group them, the functionality of the permission is going to be the same. It's just for us internally, how we envision this kind of breakdown of people or aggregation into various manageable units, right? So it's very similar to how perhaps your Windows directory is going to be configured. So for simplicity, for now, what we're going to stick to is we're going to stick to just the simple organizational rules that it's nice and clean, very simple. And then if we need to complicate it a little bit later, we can. But for now, let's just stick to the basics. So what you will see is that we've got all employees and all portal users. So all portal user and all employees, they're at the same level in the hierarchy of our permission tree. So those are two top nodes. And you can see that everything that I'm going to be building inside for a system user is going to go into all employees. All users that we're creating as the portal employee will go into this node. That's why I said that you can't really move people from here, from portal employees to all employees. We'll go ahead and create a couple of portal employees later on, but for now, let's just stick to just regular employees. In the organizational role, what you will see is that we've got managers, we've got some other functional roles, as well as access roles. So what I want to do is I want to, for the sake of the example, create a couple of organizational roles, and maybe just to create them completely separate, I'll name them after cities that they're going to be in. So I'm going to stick to, let's say, one city is going to be Toronto, one city is going to be Boston. Hopefully nobody's got a problem with that. So we're going to go and create two new organizations. So the first is going to be Toronto, and I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to put my cursor back into all employees because I want to create it inside the all employees and create another one, and I'm going to call it Boston. I'm going to save that. All right, so now we've got Toronto and Boston. They're on the same level. So we've got all employees.toronto and all employees.boston. That's the full access, basically how we're going to be getting to these groups. Now, as soon as we're updating the group or as soon as we're creating, we're going to get this little blue notification right here. This little guy is basically telling us that we've committed the change to on the server, but we haven't really committed it to the database just yet. Now, the reason it's done is when you're committing all these, when you're creating all these groups and you're, you usually do them in bulk, in chunks. So rather than making a trip to the database every time, we're just simply saying, okay, we're going to save the metadata. And when you're ready, we're going to commit once in one big transaction to the database so everything commits correctly. So when we want to update the roles, what we need to do is we need to click on a triple dot and simply click on update roles. Now, update role will commit the changes to the database. On the same level, we can synchronize with LDAP. Now, because I don't have LDAP configured here, there is no point trying. If you did, it would launch a business process or basically an internal logic component that would go ahead and pull records from Active Directory, bring it over, and then figure out all the groups and all that stuff. Now, when the groups are configured and groups are created, the next thing I want to do is I want to go through these tabs. So here in the users, we'll see the users that we're going to be putting in these groups. Now, the managers tab is an interesting one because the managers tab is basically an inheritance of permission. So let's imagine that in this particular group, Toronto, we have a couple of employees. Let's say that we have an accountant, let's say an accounts payable person, and accounts receivable person. If I am going to create
more context than the license.
We're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. Let's just talk about managers for now. So the management group, if we have somebody in accounts receivable department and accounts payable department, then the manager of the group will have the same permissions that accounts receivable plus accounts payable, so that the manager will always be able to do the work of the people who he or she manages. That's why the manager group is automatically created. Now, for our example, we're not going to be using management group. It's going to be maybe beyond the scope of this class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck that for both for Toronto and for Boston. And where's Boston? Managers. And I'm going to uncheck them. Okay. So now the groups are configured. I can add additional functional roles inside the organizational roles, but again, that's going to be a little bit more complicated than we need to be. At this point, the only thing that I want to do is I wanted to have two groups, and now I'm going to go back into my users, and I'm going to be adding Kirill into one and then Judy into the other. Now, another interesting functionality that the organizational group provides, as well as the user, is the access rule. If we're, yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I have one question. User assigned to two groups at the same time?
Pardon me?
Can the user assign to two groups or two managers at the same time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
And each group will have different roles, right?
Well, the group is what we're going to be using to assign permissions. So the permission model works in the way that if for a specific user, I'm looking for a permission, whether to grant or to deny access, I will go by the first rule that I find. So if the first rule in the list of rules that I have to go through allows me permission, I will not evaluate the next one. Okay. So if, for example, I am in a group of system administrator and in Toronto, and the system administrators are allowed access and they're the first on the list, then I will be granted access, and then my membership in the other group will be irrelevant.
As there will be a super group, for example, and I mean, if you have two groups with different roles, there might be some contradiction or some overlapping between the roles. So is there a super role, for example, or super group that overtake the other roles?
Yes, there is a rule sequence like that. So when we're setting up permissions, the rule that is the most significant is going to be on the top. And that's going to be the rule that once we evaluate, and if we evaluate that rule to true, then we no longer have to go into the next one. So it doesn't matter what the next rule is going to tell. Okay, and we will go through those examples in just a minute. Okay, so now we've created two organizational roles, Boston and Toronto. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and update roles. All it's going to do is create those roles committed in the database. It's a fairly painless procedure. The next, let's go back into our users and let's put our users into the proper groups. So this is going to be the first guy. So after we set up the username and the password, we can now click on roles, and we can say that by default, this person sits in all employees, but I want to put him into Toronto. So I'm going to go and find Toronto here and just simply save him. I'm going to do the same thing for the other user I've created. Under roles, but here I'm going to choose Boston. So now those two users are in different groups, and I can manage them accordingly. Now, licenses. Licenses are going to be listed for us here. Now, neither you nor me are using a fully licensed version. We're using a soft key version, which basically means that we have full functionality, but we're limited to X number of records. I believe it's either 1,000 or 10,000. I don't remember exactly. I think it's 1,000 records. When we want to create when we want to update license, we're going to go into this place and generate a license request. License request is, let me find it. I don't remember where we do this. Manage user licenses here. So in this middle, in this cogwheel, middle one, managed user licenses, when we go into this, and that's my local host. I'll need to, there you go. Manage user licenses. So right now, the customer ID is 111. Obviously, that's not the right one. That's just a demo stand. So your license customer ID will be some sort of a number. You will request or generate a request. The request will be a file. So let me just rename it to 321, for example. Request a license. I will take this license, email to my support department. Support will generate the response to it. It's basically like a certificate, right? Signed certificate. And then I will upload whatever the file they're sending me. Once I upload the file, I will see the licenses, the start period, the end period, and I will be able to assign them to users. That's all there is for licenses. It's a fairly straightforward thing to do. As long as we get this license, email it to support, they will generate the return for us. Make sense on the licenses? If you guys want to, yeah.
I have one question, Kirill. How do you open these tools?
Okay, this window.
Yes, please.
Okay, so let me close this. When we're in the cogwheel, System Designer, at the very bottom of the screen, there's Advanced Settings right here at the bottom of the screen, Advanced Settings. Click on the Advanced Settings, and you're going to end up in Access Rights, Configuration, Changelog, and then in the cogwheel here, you can manage your licenses.
Okay.
And then here we can generate requests. All right, great. Now I'm going to make sure that I go to my, yep.
Maybe a dumb question here. When you're talking about license, you're referring to what exactly now?
Well, the user access, so how many licenses you've got and for which product.
So we have to configure this once we activate the product?
Well, this is the part of the...
Why do we have to...
You don't, but let's assume
that something that...
No, you don't need to configure it. Usually when you activate the product, everything is done for you. It just, let's say you're going and you want to increase your license from whatever the number you have. You want to add another 10 or 15 users to it, right? So you need to maybe change your license key. The license key that you are generating right now, it's a request. This is the mechanism that we have in place. So when they're sending you a response back, the response will have a key in it for that 10 extra or 15 extra or whatever many extra users you need. And that's the only way to update the system. So similar, if you're familiar with how Exchange works with the certificates, right? You sign something, you sign a request, and then you get something, some sort of a return. This is exactly the same kind of architecture.
So if an employee leaves the company, the license would need to be transferred to a different employee, or we just use the same credentials for the login?
It's probably not good to use the same credentials. I would never recommend that. You would probably just uncheck the box for license and then check it for another employee. I'll try to generate, I'll go talk to support department when we have a break so they can generate me some sort of a license, and we'll go through the process of applying it to specific users if that's interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is how we would get the licenses. Let's go back into our users, so system users, and see what other options we can set on them. So roles, we've already applied people to organizational roles. Similarly, we could create a role, functional role now, and let's say that Judy and Kirill both are accountants. It doesn't matter that one is in Boston, one in Toronto. They're both accountants, and we can put them into functional role, which eventually will allow us to vertically or horizontally basically group people together. But that's just another way of grouping, nothing else. So don't overcomplicate it. Now, rights delegation allows us to delegate or request rights from someone else. So for example, if one has a VP, right? If let's say I have somebody who's doing my job but I'm going on vacation, then I can delegate my rights to that person who's going to be doing my job while I'm gone. Similarly, if somebody's going on vacation and I am volunteering to do their job while they're gone, I can ask for permissions to be granted to me. Now, normally this is all done by system administrator. User would never do that, right? But that's kind of a nice and easy way for us to delegate and to grant permissions on a temporary basis. So let's, for example, we're right now in Judy's account. So let's say that we're going to delegate all rights to Kirill. Oops, where am I? So now all the rights have been delegated to Kirill by Judy. That means that whatever rights I'm assigning to Judy will automatically be assigned to Kirill. So this is how it works. Similarly, I can get permissions from somebody else. So let's say I'm going to ask for permissions from system administrators. If I do that, that means that Judy now has all the permissions granted by system administrators. So essentially what it's doing, it says that Judy is now the sysadmin, but she also granted all her rights to Kirill, so Kirill now is sysadmin. Make sense?
Yes, makes sense to me. I have one question. Is there any approval process for this, or is just something you get the permission and that's fine?
For delegation and access rights?
Yes, more specifically for when you are asking for permissions.
This is done by system administrator only. So you have to be in the sysadmin group or in a specific group that's allowed to manage access. Currently, we have an audit log of the changes that are made to a group, but we do not have any approval process of basically allowing or disallowing access to something. So if the changes or if the permissions are changed, they're changed, and there is no really formal approval process at this point.
Okay, good. Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So let me go ahead and delete that because that will not be a good idea. I'll delete that and I'll delete this. And now let's flip to the last tab. So let's go to access rules. Now, range of allowed IP addresses. So here, what I can do is I can say that if I have a well-segmented network and I know that Judy is logging in from, we said Boston, right? So if I know what the Boston IP addresses are, I can say that this is the range of IP addresses that she can log on from. I can simply click on the plus and give it a range of IP addresses here, start, finish of my network. It's most useful when obviously using it from inside of your network that is well segmented. Then you can control all the IPs. When you're in the public, in the wild, I'm not sure how you would control it, but at least maybe you can say set it for the country by mask, but normally it's not very widely used function, but you could if you wanted to. So in my case, 192.168.1.100 to 200. So let's say if I had a network like this, I'd simply say that she can only log in from this range of IP addresses. So for this 101 IP addresses, she can log in, but nothing else. All right. Okay. Let's go back to, oh yes, one more thing, homepage and default time format. So the homepage, usually I don't like setting it up for people because I don't know what is it that they're going to be using, but we can. So for example, if we know that Judy is going to be going into contacts all day long, or maybe she's working with leads all day long, then we can choose the homepage for her to be maybe leads. And that means that upon initial login, she will be taken to the lead page rather than the enterprise intro page where we have the YouTube kind of a video. She will be taking immediately to leads. I personally don't set it up for people. They can do it for themselves. But what I do like to set it up for them is the date and time format. So I'm going to say she's English, United States, somewhere here, United States. Okay, so we can say that, and that's it. And at this point, the user is configured. Now, when she's going to be logging in for the first time into the system, unfortunately, there was no way for us to set up a time zone for her. So she still needs to go into the profile, just like we did for the supervisor, and go ahead and set up her time zone. Let me just get rid of this restriction, and I'll close this. Okay, so now everything is done. So we've got a couple of users, so let's test it out. Now this blue thing is telling us that something needs to be updated, so I'm just going to go and update my roles. Everything is done. I'm going to grab the copy of this URL and open the new instance of the browser, come back here, and try to log on as Judy. So J Krylov 123. And now I'm logged on. This is my record, so we could see that if I go into my profile, The default time zone is picked up from the setting, but she can go ahead and change it to whatever she needs to be. And then English United States was chosen for us when we configured the user directly. So the only thing that I'm going to do is not in the command line, in the call center integration, I'm just simply going to disable this and save that so we have no problems with this. Also, what it's sometimes useful if user keeps going into the system under the same not under the same, but under different credentials for whatever reason, then it's probably best that you update some sort of a picture here that at least you know which user you're going to be using. So for this will come from your contacts, and you could see that the contact that she is seeing is slightly different than what administrator is seeing. So let's just review what admin is seeing versus what she is seeing. I'm seeing Mandrill and I'm seeing SysPortal connection, and she's not seeing those. And that's because these two guys, they have different permissions applied to them. So not everyone can see these records. And we'll go into this next, and we're going to review how we can set up these permissions. All right, so let's go and actually do that now that we have the groups. In order for us to apply those access permissions, we have to flip back to this designer and click on the access rights tab. Now, on the access rights, what you will see here is a list of all the objects that are present in the system. It's a multi-page view, so if you need to go into the next page, you go into the next page. Now, it's a little painful to do it this way, so what I suggest you do is you go through all objects and switch to section view. Section view will group objects related to one section into kind of one line, so then whatever the permissions you're applying on the section will be applied on all the objects inside that section. All right, now we've got 3 columns here, so managed by records, managed by columns, and managed by operations. All these columns will represent various permission schemes or methods of determining permission for a specific user. So for example, managed by records will allow us to say rows specific records in a database. So for example, row 1 can be seen by Boston, row 2 can be seen by Toronto, etc., etc. Managed by columns will allow us to go inside the row and say that column 0, column 5, and column 10 is visible for a Boston user, whereas the other columns are visible, let's say, to everyone. And managed by operations will allow us to specify operations that we can do on the table. So for example, maybe I don't even want to allow access to the table, period. Forget the rows. I just don't want to give you access to anything in that table. So then I would use managed by operations. So let's go ahead and try to do that one by one and see how it works. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some sort of a, we're going to grab a, what are we going to take? We're going to take, let's take account. It's the first on the list. It's the easiest to find. And we're going to use managed by records and managed by operations as the first example. And then we're going to go to managed by columns a little bit later. So what we will see is managed by records will correspond to default permissions. Managed by operations will correspond to access to object rules, right? So we'll do one at a time. So let's click on access to objects, and that's, we remember it's managed by operations. Managed by operations is currently checked, so that means that these rules will kick in. Now currently, all portal users and all employees have read permissions. Now to create new, portal users have no permission, portal users have no edit permission, portal user have no delete permission, so they have some sort of a read permission. And then all employees, you remember that's the top level of our organization structure, all employees have complete access to absolutely everything. And so let's, first of all, let's get rid of all portal employees to begin with. I don't want to give them any access to my account, and let's get rid of these guys as well. And we're going to now create our own rule. So to create our own rule, we have to click on the new. And let's say that I want to create not by user. See, you can choose by user, but assigning permissions by user is not a good idea. As user move and they change, and you change their maybe credentials, it's not credentials, but their usernames as they move around, you're going to have to come back here and reassign permissions. And that's kind of tedious thing to do. So it's always better to just apply groups and then use the group membership to define whether or not you have access to objects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into all employees, and I'm going to find Boston Group. Then I'm going to go into another rule, and I'm going to find under all employees Toronto Group. So under Boston, I'm going to say that you've got access to absolutely everything. You can read, you can create new, but let's deny edit, let's deny delete. And for Boston, let's deny everything, including creating new records, and see how that works. But they all have access to, let's say, reading the records. When you're clicking something in this interface, there is really nothing for us to set up. There is absolutely no need for it. The only thing that we need to remember is that permissions are cached when we're logging into the system. So what we can do is we can either forcefully remove the person or basically kill their section by going into the user and killing the section, or we just, since we have both browsers enabled here, we'll just log out and log back in, and that will bring the new access model. So now what I want to do is I want to go into my general, I want to go into my accounts, and there's my company account, our company, and we are Judy. So under Judy, we're in Boston, and in Boston we can read, we can create, no, we can't create new. So let's test that. Let's close that and let's create a new account. New Boston. And that's what the system is telling me. So it's letting me open Minicard and asking me for some information, minimum required information to create the record. But when we actually hitting the database, it's telling us that we have insufficient permission to add objects. So this is kind of the table global permission. Make sense? Does it make sense, guys? Did I lose you?
No, you don't lose me.
Okay, good.
I was just trying to reproduce what you did.
Okay. All right. So now we see that Judy cannot edit. She cannot create new record. Let's go in and let's see if I can change something. So google.ca, I shouldn't be able to save that. Excellent. So it's telling me the same thing. I cannot edit my record, so I can't modify anything. So I'm going to get out. And what if I want to delete the record? Same thing. I don't have permissions to do that. Fantastic. So let me exit this record right now. And I'm going to go as me. And I am in the Toronto group. So I can read and I create new, but I still cannot edit and I still cannot delete. So let's go ahead into general. Let's go into accounts. That's our company. Let's
Sorry for interrupting. I guess we lost Hiba, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yes. Oh no, she's back.
Okay, good. Good. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the participants. So everyone's back, I assume?
Anyway,
all right.
We're with you.
Okay, great. So now I'm logged in as Kirill, and as Kirill in Toronto, I have access to read, create new, but I have no permission. No, yeah, in Toronto, I have read and create new, but no permission to edit, no permission to delete. So I'm going to try to update my website. I shouldn't be able to do that. Okay, fantastic. So it's not letting me do that. I obviously cannot delete it. We've already tested that, but I should be able to create new account. So Toronto account, and I can save this, and it allows me to save the account. There I am. But now if I want to update it, I shouldn't be able to do that. There you go, right? So it's not allowing me to update it. So you can be very, very flexible with your permissions, right? At least deletion of the record should be very important for people to take care of, right? So deletion record is usually allowed you're usually allowed to do that by system administrators, right? So if I wanted to modify this rule, even though as a system administrator, I can do anything and everything, I will maybe do this and say that system administrator has access to absolutely everything. And then we just make sure that we have absolutely no problem. Oops, I added that in the wrong place. Let me disable this, and this. Okay, so sysadmin is on top and sysadmin has access to everything. Now, what if we had a competing rule, just like we said, right? So if we had, let's say, something like all employees. Now, you remember that Boston is inside all employees and Toronto is inside all employees. Now, when we added somebody in the group right here, let's go back into our group membership. And when we added somebody into Toronto, it was Kirill, right? But Kirill is also in a group for all employees. So all employees and Toronto. So when we're looking at a permission model here, all employees are allowed to have access to everything. So let's test that. So I'm gonna exit. I'm gonna log back in as myself. Under accounts. I'm going to go back into Toronto account and I'm going to try to update google.ca. I'm going to save that. Now it allowed me to save the record. And the reason it allowed me to save the record is because this rule, all employees, kicked in first. It evaluated the truth. It found that Kirill is part of this group, all employees, and it didn't bother checking anything else. Does that make sense? Now let's go ahead and change them around. Let's put Toronto on top. Log out and log back in. And try to make some changes now. And now I have insufficient permission. Now, the reason it happened is because it evaluated the group. It said, is Kirill part of this group? Yes. Does he have permissions to edit? No, that's it. We're not checking any other rules. So the first group that we find is the one that we can deny access to. Does this make sense? It's very important. All right, I assume it does. So the most permissive or dismissive, I guess, groups you put on top, depending on what you want to do, depending how you. Yeah.
Kerry, sorry to interrupt you. This is what I was going to ask you. So the most restrictive role must be on the top, right?
In this, yes, I would say that you probably want to restrict. But it depends how you structure your organization, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you don't have to, here, when we're in, creating Kirill, he doesn't have to be a member of all employees. He's just a member of Toronto Group.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
It really depends how you structure your users and where they belong, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm. When we use the hierarchy, for the organization roles, when we use the hierarchy, does it affect this as well?
Well, kind of, not in, it does affect that. So it's going to go and it's going to try to see if you're a member of some group. So for example, if you're a member of all employees and we just applied everything to all employees, but I was only a member of Toronto, like this, mm-hmm. right? So let me just get rid of it. I'll show you. So now I'm just a member of Toronto, right? And I'm not a member of all employees. Let me do that. Let me just update roles just to make sure. And then what are we going to do here? So under Toronto, that's not interesting. So let's go ahead and bump up all employees all the way to the top. So all employees have full access and Toronto has maybe do that we have absolutely no access, right? Let me just log out, log back in. I'm going to go to accounts, Toronto account. Still allows me to save it, right? So hierarchy, it does get inherited.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay, so that's what we have with this group. So what I am going to do is I'm going to now delete Toronto and Boston. I can select those two groups and I'm going to delete them both. And I'm just going to come back into, I'm going to come back into my user and I'm going to make sure that he's a member of all employees. That's Judy. Into myself and make sure that I'm also a member of all employees. Just makes it easier. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to try to create permissions based on the row axis. So what that means is I'm going to go into the accounts and you can see that under accounts right now I'm a system administrator. You can see this little icon. So I've got AECOM, our company, BPM Online, and a Toronto account. Now the Toronto account, we just created one. So let's take a look how it was created and why the other ones aren't visible by the other users. So let's open this. And if we want to see record-specific permissions, then when you open the record, we click on the actions, set up access rights. When we look at the setup access rights, we'll see who's got access to them. So we've got read access, all portal users, Kay Krylov because he's the one created it, and group all employees. Again, for the added, all employees and me, and for delete, all employees and me. So this is a record-specific access. Let me go back into BPM Online. It's another company here. Set up access rights, and here we have no permissions set up. So the only reason I'm as a supervisor can see it is because there is a setting, system setting, can see all records or can delete all records, and the supervisor or system administrators are included there. I'll show you that in a minute, but for now, just bear with me on this one. When we're coming into the account section and we want to set up those row-specific permissions, we have to go into default permissions. So the default permission is here. So all employees, all employees, all employees, all portal users. So there's two rules right now. And these two rules will correspond to what you're seeing right here. So let's go back into setup access rights. So you'll see all portal users and all employees. And here, all portal users and all employees. Now you may also notice that we've got a checkbox and a little key. That stands for granted or granted with delegation. So all employees can see the records, plus they can delegate. All portal users can simply grant. So meaning that they can only get the permission, but they can't delegate it to somebody else. The middle record is the one that we go by created by. So when the record is created by someone, that someone will always have access to that row. So it cannot be deleted. So it would automatically be inherited unless obviously we manually go and override all that stuff. But by default, the access permission will be granted to the individual user who created that specific record. So let's go ahead and try to, not amend it, but modify this a little bit. So first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of all these portal employees. I'm going to delete all employees altogether. And I'm going to create a new rule, and I'm going to say that records created by Toronto are visible to users who are members of a group Toronto. I'm going to go ahead and create the same thing for Boston, and I'm going to say Boston members can see Boston records. Okay, I'm not going to do anything else. Now, in this browser, I'm going to log out, log back in, I'm going to go back into the accounts, and I'm going to create a new account. I'm going to create account Toronto 1. And I'm going to open this and take a look at the user credentials. So you could see that the members of Toronto are concede and I concede, and then the edit and the delete permissions we haven't touched. So let's exit and let's walk in as Judy. We're going into the accounts. She cannot see the account that we just created, that Toronto 1 account. So let's go ahead and create Boston 1. Boston 1. Okay, let's open the account, go into actions, set up access rights, and you could see that only Boston and Judy can see those things, right? And then for the edit and delete, we haven't touched those. Okay, great. So now, what if I wanted to, let's say, come in as a new employee? Let's say, what would be visible to me if I was just an old employee member? So let's go ahead and create another user, and I will demonstrate. So we're going to go to system users, insufficient permission. Yes, because I'm not the sysadmin. So let's go back as system user and create another user. I'm going to do new company employee. We're going to choose the existing contact, Andrew Baker. I'm going to give him a Baker 1, 2, 3. I'm going to save him. And when we open Andrew, we'll take a look at the roles, and he's just simply sitting in all employees. So let's now switch to this browser, log out, go into accounts, and you could see that he can see neither Boston nor Toronto. So let's modify that. Let's do it a little different. Let's go back into our credentials and let's say that whoever creates records, let's assume that Andrew is now not all employee, but he's maybe in accounting, right? So let's say that whoever can create, so when the records are created by somebody in Toronto, they can also be visible by an accounting department. And also when records are created in Boston, they're visible in accounting department. Okay, great. Now, the last thing we need to do is we need to make sure that Andrew is a member of accounting department. So let's find his user. Let's go to roles and give him role to accounting department. All right. May update roles just in case. Now, if we're simply going to log out from Andrew's records and log back in, we're not going to see much different. We're still seeing the same account. And the reason for it is because the record is burnt, or the permissions are burnt onto that specific record. So let's review that. So we're going to go, we're going to go to accounts, and we're going to go to Toronto 1. The Toronto 1 permissions still have only Toronto and Kirill as somebody who can read it. This new rule that we just added was not applied to the records that previously existed in the system. They will be applied only to the records that are going to be created from now on. Does that make sense? So let's go ahead and create a new one. I'm going to go into now as Kirill, and I'm going to create a new record under account section. I'm going to call it Toronto 2. Okay, record created, and now Toronto 2 is, oh, I am now different credentials. Sorry. A.Baker should have used a different browser. And let's go to accounts. And now I see Toronto 2 for Andrew, right? Now, when Toronto 2 was created, the accounting department is listed. So the lesson that we're trying to learn here is that when we're changing permissions, they're not going to be applied to the records already existing in the system. They're only going to be applied to the records created from now on. If we want to modify records already existing to comply with whatever permission model we have in place right now, then we need to execute a couple of SQL scripts. Fairly straightforward, but it's not something that you can do as the user by setting up the permissions. Make sense? Any questions on this?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, great. Now, if we find ourselves in a position that we don't really want to go and modify anything permission-wise, and we just need on the exception basis, grant someone access to some record that they otherwise are not allowed to have. And for example, for this Toronto one, if I want to give it to accounting department right now, what I can do is I can click on the new, oops, come on. I can, let me just close this. So here's Toronto 1, and let's say for Toronto 1, I want to give it access to that accounting department on exception basis. I can go to set up access rights, and I can say new, read access right, and let's give it to accounting, oops, or Andrew specifically. Let's do A.Baker. And now Andrew Baker will have access granted to him on this one account. Now, it's obviously not something you want to do for a group of accounts, but if you just need to do an exception basis, then it's fairly straightforward thing to do. Now, the other ones, the edit and deletes, are going to be very, very similar. We find ourselves in the default permission on the read permit, on the read operation here. If we check down to edit, we have the edit rules that will apply to the edit section. So whether or not we can edit the records, and then the deletes, similar. We say that all employees can delete, but we probably don't want to allow all employees to delete. So we'll modify it to say, we'll probably create some sort of a delete allowed group, and then we will closely monitor what's being deleted and when it's deleted, since we don't want the records just to kind of go missing in the database. It's really up to you how you configure this stuff, but usually in the CRM, people prevent users to delete records just because they want to, right? Especially if these are your leads or accounts. So this is what we can do with permissions. Now, the last thing that I wanted to show you with permissions is how to use manage by columns. Now, in order for us to manage something by columns, we first have to activate it. You can see that for no records is it activated at this point. They're all disabled. And the reason for it is if we're going into the system and we're first checking whether or not you have access to the table, period. So let's say yes. Then we say, do you have access to a specific row? We say yes. And if now we have to go and check for the columns, then depending on how many columns, 20, 50, 60, maybe some of them have blobs, we now have to check it for every single column. So what it's doing, it's putting stress and it slows system down. Now, if you do it for a table or two, not a big deal. But if you're going to do it for many tables, for many columns, and you have many users all at the same time, and we're trying to evaluate these permissions, you may experience some delays. So just basically use it carefully. Normally what I would recommend you use it for is on the contact section. Maybe you want to store people contacts, social security number, social identity, or social SINs basically. You want to store their credit cards, then by all means manage it by columns. Otherwise you probably have row and table permissions. It's sufficient. When you're activating this object, there's going to be, or activating this checkbox, there's going to be a bunch of stuff happening in the background to provide for this functionality on this table. So the system is going through compilation right now. It's going to go through a bunch of changes. So basically, it takes maybe a minute, depending on how fast we are. Any questions in the meantime?
Not for now.
Okay.
Kerry, I am assuming that, for example, if we need to change permission for another session, we have the similar.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to show you. So basically my intention here is to show you how you can modify the existing one, because it's pretty important. Contact accounts, invoices, things like that, right? But then soon we're going to start creating our own objects in the system, and I will show you how we can adjust those changes, or how we can configure something to be visible in this list. So you can definitely do it for your own objects.
Okay.
Okay. So finally, it's done. So managed by columns is activated. So now let's go to column permissions and switch to this middle tab. Did I click on it again? I apologize if I did. No. Okay. So this will bring us a list of all columns that we have. So for example, notes, code, modified by, parent account, etc., etc. And let's say that I want to take this category. So I'm not sure what the category is. Let's cancel out of here. Category. Where's my category? Here's my category list, right? And currently I could see A, B, C, and D. So let's say that Toronto has a category of A. So, and now on this category, I'm going to say that I'm going to create a new rule, and I'm going to create it for Toronto people only. And I'm going to say that they cannot see it. Okay. And then I'm going to go and create another rule for Boston. And I could say that Boston can only see it, but not add it. So let's apply this rule. Well, let's go back into here, exit, and let's go as Toronto user. Now this guy, have I saved it? So Toronto 1 category A. So let's go into accounts, open to, oops. Let's open Toronto 1. And you see that I do not see category, period. I just don't see it, right? Like I see a list of options, but I don't see the value for it. And if I try to save something, it's telling me that I don't have permissions. So as the user, I may not even know that the value is set for this column. I'm just not seeing it. But if I'm trying to change it, I can do that. All right. So now let's go ahead and exit this guy, and let's go as Judy. J. Just one thing to check that she has access to it. I'm going to create new permission on the row here, new on the edit, just so that she can see the records. Okay, so now we're going to go into accounts, my accounts. We're going to go into Toronto 1, and she could see category. See that? So the category is available to her, but if I wanted to change that, she still has insufficient permission, even though she has permissions in here saying that she can edit it, but she's not allowed to edit the column. So the permission model is fairly straightforward. First, we apply permission to the table, If granted, we go inside and onto the row, then we apply the default permission. If granted, then we go into the columns. If granted, great, you've got full access. If not, then you're going to get this access disallowed kind of a pop-up box, right? Model window. So that's how the permission model works. Now, the last thing that we want to do is we want to exit from as Judy, and let's make sure that all employees have access to this record. Let's create read access. We're going to give it to Andrew, or no, all employees, right? We're going to give it new edit access to all employees. Okay, and in here we said all employees have full access to it. Okay, great. So we're going to go as Andrew Baker. Yeah. Let's go into accounts, open Toronto 1. We find that we can see category, and let's change it to B, and everything works just fine. So this way we can set permissions on a very low level. Any questions on this?
I have one question. Can we, can I assume, is it right to assume that, for example, if I have a portal user and I want him to only edit his credit card field, is it the same kind of permission, the same setting?
The portal functionality needs to be added to portal first, but the permission, yes. Yes, okay. You would be able to say that portal user has no access to anything except for these fields, right? But you would need to add that functionality first to the portal. Well, we can take a look at it a little bit later, like at the end of the course, but it's not just like you're logging in and you have fully fledged system, right, with everything available to you. So we still need some modifications there. All right, so that will wrap up permission model for us for now. So let's take a bit of a break, and then 10 minutes, 15 minutes, what do you guys think? And then we can move on to the next stuff. What do you,
10 minutes, it's fine.
Okay, so 10 minutes, it's 29 after, so at 40 after, I'll be back.
Good.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right, let's go back. So now we're ready to start.
Kirill?
Yes.
We have lost the connection since 40 minutes ago, I think.
You lost the connection?
Yes, we were not able to hear or see anything.
Okay, that's strange. I mean, we were fine. Maybe it's on your end, because I think that we had no problem with any other participants.
I was trying to reach on your phone number, and I sent you a couple of emails, but no response was on your side until the last email.
Yeah, I wasn't really checking it until we took a break, to be honest.
Well, actually, I guess you lost at 1:59 Dubai time.
Okay.
Because when Kirill was asking, do you remember when you were asking Kirill, is there any questions? I guess I wrote that we lost Oman. Yes, okay. It was 40 minutes ago.
Strange.
Yeah, it's around 45 minutes ago.
Wow. I'm not sure what's going on. I mean, like, I don't see any connection issues on my end at all, to be honest. Everything is telling me everything is fine. Connection is great. Well, the only thing that I can do is
see that we are connected or not.
Yeah, like it's showing me that you guys are all connected. I see 3 Hibas connected. No, 2 now.
Okay, did we miss anything? Can we repeat what's next?
I'll cover with you whatever we've missed, but I don't remember. So you disconnected, what, about 45 minutes ago?
Yes.
Yeah, like we've covered pretty much all the permission section. So I'll cover that with you outside the training. I'll do a quick recap with you. We're gonna go to a new topic. I have all the recordings of everything we've done, and then I'll spend some time with you individually just to make sure that you're not lost on this. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, great. So what I want to, yep.
Can you please send us the full agenda regarding each topic we're going to discuss? I already sent an email, but no response was.
Yeah,
They told me that with the.
I'll send all the recordings as soon as they're available. So as soon as we're done with training, it'll take me about an hour to get the file, and then I'll post it. I'll send you the link.
No, I don't mean the recordings. I mean the full agenda topics that we're going to discuss during the training.
Oh yes, okay. I'll send you those. I'll send you those after we're done. No problem. Okay. So what I want to do now is I want to go and cover a little bit of the audit log, where we can see the changes in whatever the records we're modifying.
Have we went through the differences between the functional roles and the organizational roles?
Yes, I've mentioned that those are different ways of grouping the people. In terms of what it's actually doing from the permission standpoint of view, it's exactly the same thing. It's just a different way of grouping people. So one way we're doing kind of the hierarchical structure, and the functional role would be something that doesn't fit into hierarchy. For example, when you have an accountant in Toronto and an accountant in Boston, we can group them both into one group called accountants, and then apply permissions to that grouping. But it's no different than using the organizational role.
So, I mean, if we went and put some features in the organizational rules, we don't have to go through the functional as well if it's sufficient for us.
Yes. So it's either one or the other. Actually, if you're using both, it's probably going to be a little bit more confusing which one will apply, especially when you have the overlap. So usually people stick to
actually.
Yeah. So usually people stick to either one or the other. Okay. So let me close this browser now. And what I want to do is now I want to be now I'm the system sysadmin again, the supervisor in this login screen. And what I want to do is I want to go and set up some sort of a audit logging that I can see whatever the changes I'm making on the record, so I can go ahead and find out what was actually changed. So let's go into our friend, into the System Designer Advanced Settings. So I'll close this and we'll go there again. So cogwheel to get us to System Designer, scroll all the way bottom, Advanced Settings. And the Advanced Settings, we're going to go now into a change log. Okay, so when this change log first opens up, if we had some records available to us, these fields would be enabled and we would be able to select something, but we haven't configured anything. So let's go and create something. So under this play button, let's click on the setup log. And here we have to choose what object we're going to be creating a log for. And so we're going to create it for a new object called, let's say, account.
The same display as the product we bought, right? I think the interface here is different.
Yes, it's a little different. That's the interface that you're seeing once you go into the advanced settings. So when you are here in the advanced settings, the interface is a little different. All products will have it. It doesn't matter which product you use. It just, this part of the system, it looks slightly different. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're setting it up for the account section. So let's say that I want to change, I want to audit, what do I want to audit? Maybe industry, maybe code, maybe type. Should be enough for me.
And what is this exactly?
And this is the audit log. So when I want to look for what changes were made to the record, if I want to keep an eye on who's changing, what's being changed, this is the facility to do that.
And what do we mean by code here?
Code is just one of the columns in the account table. Usually it would be your AP code or accounting code or some sort of a code. It's just a column in the table. And I want to monitor the values of that column.
Okay.
Okay, so we saved the first setting. Let's close it. And now let's go back into our account section. And I want to take Boston 1 and I want to change maybe industry to something. I'm going to change code from 3 to 56 and I'm going to save this. So what I want to see here is my new values. The first time we're loading the page, it needs to be refreshed because there's no records. And there's my new record. So it's telling me that the Boston 1 was modified by supervisor. The modifications were made on, here's the time. The operation that caused or triggered this record was an update to the record. And if I want to change to see the actual values, I have to pull those columns. So set up columns, right click on the header somewhere, and let's go and find industry. And let's go and find code. And those are my new values. If I'm going to go back into the system here again and change my code from 56 to, let's say, 99, I'm going to save this and come back to my audit log. I no longer need to refresh the entire page. There is a refresh button that's available. I can just look at it now and I can see that now my value is 99. So this is the audit log, basically how I can set up the audit for specific columns on specific tables. I can configure it to be on any object. I can configure to view it for, let's say, specific dates or only for a specific user. But let's review what else we can do here. Let's say that if I am now going to go and delete this Boston 1, what I'm going to see in this guy is the red line. The red line will indicate operation delete, and it's telling us the last known value of the columns that we subscribe to monitor. So the industry was banks, the code value was 99, and the operation was deleted. This information is not available anywhere else. It's not going to be available to us, obviously, in the tables. It's gone. But if we have the audit log, at least we know what was deleted. Similarly, if we are creating a new account, so let's create another account. We're going to call it Boston 2. Let's create industry banks and code 67. We're going to close this, come back here. We're going to see a couple of records. So the first record is the record created. Now the record was created through a mini card, that little thing that didn't allow us to set the code and the industry. So the first thing we're seeing is that Boston 2 was created. There's the time. And then if we sort it by modified time, we'll see that the records were updated to have banks and 67. We can also filter for something by name. So for example, here, name, Boston 2, and it will tell me what was happening. So we're seeing that at 1:56 p.m., the record was created. We don't really see any other values because we're not subscribing to see them. But then we're seeing the second record is that the record was updated to include industry equal bank, code equal 67. So this is the facility that allows us to audit those records. Any questions on the audit log?
One question.
Yep.
Does it affect performance?
Well, yeah, if we're auditing everything everywhere, then yes, it will slow it down because now we have to make records basically in more places. Plus we have to have a bit of resources dedicated to triggers that are firing every time we're setting up the trigger, right? So, but not dramatically. I mean, like if you're monitoring a table or two, no, you're not going to see a difference. If you're going to be monitoring every single object in the system, then probably. I haven't personally tested it under load, but yes, of course it would.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so if we were to create a new additional audit log, so here we set it up for just an account. If I were to create another one to set up a new log, and now I'm going to set up a new table. So let's say I want to do the same thing for contacts. Then I'd be able to switch here between the objects. So this way I can go from one place to another. So it's nicely organized. Again, here we can choose all the columns that are present in the contact column, in the contact table. Choose whichever ones we want to monitor: birth date, business phone numbers, full names, etc. And that's going to give us the changes that we need. So that's pretty much all we can do on the audit log. Very simple, but yet effective. The other logging facility for us is going to be around operations. So operations that we can log are going to be listed in the system settings. So let's go into System Designer again, and you'll see here audit log facility, and currently it's empty. If we're going to go into this thing, it's also going to be empty. And under actions, we don't really have anything archived. We can remove all the filters, all the date filters, but it's still empty. The reason it's empty is because by default, nothing is really being monitored. So to configure and to allow us to monitor things, we need to go back into the System Designer, scroll down to the system settings, find administration, and inside the audit log, these are the actions that we can monitor. So for example, log client IP management events. So if we open this, we set the Boolean value to true, and now those events are going to be logged in the audit log. We have to do it for every event that we're interested in monitoring. What we're going to see is what action was performed and which IP addresses triggered that action. So let's find user management events, for example. Let's click it. Let's save this. And let's go back to users. Let's find this Andrew Baker. Let's grab his role and let's add him maybe to system administrators. Let's save this. Close it. We don't really need to update roles, but it's just a matter of habit at this point. Scroll back, go to the audit log, and there's my record. So it says that user Andrew Baker, value column modified, culture, etc., etc. So it's telling us what is it that was like a quick description. If we want to add additional columns, we click on the view, select fields to display, and from here, from the audit log table, we can choose maybe IP address if that's of an interest to us. Well, it's repeated, so that's not a good example. What else we can grab here? Type we have, result we have, event IP address, and a description. Okay, so all the fields are basically here.
But not good for us.
So that's going to give us the description of the fact that Andrew was modified. It's not really telling us what was modified, but we can add and activate additional logging facilities that will tell us. It's all done through system settings. I personally don't activate it for myself, obviously, because it's not important for me on the local host, but if you want, you can see it. Now, this guy will give us some archived. So when we're archiving, the archiving option is going to be automatic, or we can trigger it to be archived. If we trigger it to go into archive, then we can see it in the archive. So what it's doing, it's basically taking this record, removing it from the main page to a different page, so that the SQL doesn't have to work hard on the larger tables, especially if the audit log is fairly large. then it goes into archive, and we keep nice and tight table that SQL will be writing to that's indexed. So that's essentially what the audit logging allows us to do. So we can see permission changes and we can see the data changes. That's about it. Any questions on the audit log?
Nope, thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So at this point, I think we can start with creating our own new maybe section and creating our own little object that we're going to be using for the rest of the training. So I propose that we create an expense report. We're going to try to automate it, and we're going to try to put some cases around it and things like that. But the first thing we need to do is we need to create a place where we're going to be storing it. So the place that I want to put it, I don't want to put it in the existing workplaces. I want to create my own workplace here. And to do that, I'm going to go into the System Designer, and I'm going to scroll down to Workplace Setup. Also, if you want to customize your logo or customize your colors, the options are here. So let's go into a workplace setup. You'll see that the workplaces currently visible in the list are the ones that you're seeing here, with the exception of, I believe, one, Portal, because the portal is only visible to portal users. When you click on the places, workplaces, you can open it and you could see the sections that go inside the workplace. So if I switch to sales, you'll see that the dashboard, feed, leads, etc., right? So there are all the sections that are populated in this workplace. Also, the user groups are right here who have access to it. So for example, if I'm going to create a functionality that is specific to maybe accountants, and I'm picking an accountant just because I was one for a long time, then perhaps we don't want to be including a bunch of other stuff that is completely irrelevant, like audit logs and system settings. We only want to include things that are important for an accountant to do his job. Then we're going to create a workplace and assign to a group accountant. Nobody else will see that group, only those people. And that's how we can create kind of a nice environment and give people only tools they need. So if I wanted to, for example, remove something from sales, all I would need to do is click on the section that I want to remove and just delete it, basically, right? So let's create a new workplace. I'm going to call it training. So let's call it training. We're going to give it to user groups, all employees. And at this point, I don't want to do anything else. It's going to be an empty section. Now, the workplace gets cached when the user logs in. So we won't see it right away for us. We actually need to move to Profile, exit the system, and come back into it. When we log in, we should be able to see the training workplace created for us. And there's my training. Okay, now that the workplace is created and it's going to be a placeholder for us to store the sections that we're going to be modifying, I can go ahead and start creating a section. A section is the actual piece that combines multiple tables, maybe a couple of pages, things of that nature, all into one. It's something that provides us a functionality. A workplace is a collection of those sections that we can assign to various users, but the section is the one that actually providing the functionality. To create the section, we yet again need to go to System Designer and find Section Wizard. Section Wizard right here under System Setup. You could see it right above Detail Wizard. We will be using that a little later, but for now, we need to use Section Wizard. Let's click on it. Section Wizard allows us to basically store.
Can I ask you, please?
Yeah.
Can we work without creating a workplace?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can create your own section and put it into any workplace by choosing it right here. It just for our training, I wanted to go into a training workplace. That's it. But yes, you can.
I mean, what's the advantage of having a workplace?
you're grouping sections into kind of groups that you can give access to people. So for example, if I only need to have access to leads, accounts, contacts, and invoices, then I'm going to create probably a workplace that has access to those things only, and that's it. And then the rest of the system is going to be invisible to the user, so it's a lot easier to navigate around rather than offering them access to everything. Okay? It's basically like hiding menus in any application, right? So they don't need to go there, so just remove it, basically.
Okay.
Okay, so here let's call it expense or request. Let's call it request today. Expense request maybe. Expense request. Now the code, you could see that the code, like I told you earlier, I have a prefix configured to be ACDM. Now in your case, if you haven't changed that default prefix, it will be USR. It's very important that we stick to those prefixes because that's how we make sure that there is no collision. It's almost like partial namespace. So let's call it expense request. I'm going to put it in the workplace called training, and I can change the icon if I wanted to. Let me see if I find something. What's good for expense report? And this is good enough. Okay, so that's going to be for my expense report. At this point, I can click on my page, I can save it. We're not going to cover it right now what this multi-page or single page views are and what's the approval section. We're going to skip it. We're going to do it a little bit later. But for now, we want to switch to the page so that the page designer has a chance to generate a schema to represent the page. Once that is done, we can click on the save and all changes will be committed to the database. Once it saves, I want to go over with you with what was actually saved in the backend. It's very important that we understand that. Okay, so everything was saved. Now there is a little shortcut. If you don't want to go through advanced settings and then go to your objects, right here in the middle.
It might be a dumb question, but why when I click on advanced settings, it opens another window? Why I don't keep the same loop in the system itself?
Because this is the interface that's from version 5.0. It just people didn't get around to update it. It provides all the functionality, just visually wasn't updated to something new. I'm not sure when it's going to be updated, to be honest.
Okay.
Okay. So here's the view. You could see that our Academy package includes all these changes, right? So this is the bunch of objects that were created. So let's review what they are. But before we do that, one little quick shortcut. If you take this URL and simply go /URL/0/dev, you will be able to get to the same place just in this tab. It's an important place for us to go to and be able to get to. So for example, when we're updating something in the system and we break it and we can no longer log in, we can at least navigate to this page /0/dev and we can take out all the changes that we were applying and before we broke something. So we can delete it, mute it, do whatever, or maybe we need to finish compilation by going to compile all items. So this is an important shortcut. From time to time, you will need to use it. I'm just going to close it for now. Okay, so let's review the objects that were created. So the first one is going to be ACDM expense report. Then we're going to create, then the browser or the wizard created the page and the section views, the file, the folder, request in folder, the tag, and in tag. So these guys we're going to look at a little bit later, but let's review the important ones. The important object is this one, ACDM expense report. This is the actual table inside the database, and the page is the JavaScript that represents the page that we're opening. If we're double clicking on the object, on the table object, we can inspect its properties as well as its structure. So under ACDM expense report, if we click on the header, it will tell us the name the title, the package where it's currently stored, and the parent object. The parent object is also very, very important because we are inheriting some of the properties of the base object in this case. So this particular base object is really, really simple. It doesn't have any triggered events. It doesn't have any processes attached to it. However, if we had some server validation, maybe specific APIs, and we're inheriting from those objects, that we would automatically grab that functionality. But this one is very, very simple. The next thing that you probably want to do is you want to switch to an advanced, not advanced mode, but to show all the properties. You do that in the top right corner here, click on this drop-down list, and then click on all. This will give you all the properties of this object. So it's going to tell us its behavior, its access rights, it's going to give us some system columns and history columns. The history columns need to be present. You cannot, or well, you shouldn't be changing them. These columns are going to be to store the audit data as well as to manage updates and changes. So created by, created on, modified by, modify on. And then the system columns, the important one is that the ID is going to be the main key, where it's basically the unique identifier of a type GUID. And then the name is going to be a default display value. So when we refer to something in the system by ID, the return is going to be the display value. We can change the display value, and it may not be important for us right now, but I will show you an example later where we can modify it and make our life a little bit easier. We can here change the access rights. For example, we can say that we would like to manage this object. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Again, this may be a dumb question. What is the purpose of an object? As an end user, do we have to create objects, or this is more for the admin? Because I'm looking at a sales perspective here.
As an end user, it's absolutely, you're not going to be touching any of this. This is administration/development. And the remainder of this class is going to be for administration/development. It has nothing to do with the end user functionality.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So if I want to apply access permissions to this specific object, or essentially it's the table in the SQL, I can do here by checking these boxes, so columns, records. So I'll set it to records, and that's probably good enough for me at this point. I can give it a description, so I can say that it's a parent record. And if I wanted to inspect the properties of the actual table, I will see that I've inherited some columns, so ID, created by, created on, and then this ACDM name is the one that I closed it. ACDM name is what we saw top left corner as the name of the object. Let me save this change that I just made. When I'm saving the change by clicking on this floppy drive, all it's doing is saving the metadata. It's not actually committing changes to the database. If I wanted to commit my changes to the database, I need to publish. You could see which objects are published, which ones aren't, by looking at the list of objects, and you could see that here, database update required. So this checkbox will be automatically set for those that haven't been published yet. So the easiest way is, instead of saving, we're going to publish it. When the object is published, everything from here, from basically table adapter, will be flushed down to the database. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to show you what it created on the back end. Publishing takes a fair amount of time. Okay, in the meantime, here's the SQL backend. So let's look in the database. The one that we're using is this guy. And in the tables, what we can find is, so there's my, here's a couple of tables that were created for us to represent those objects that we saw in this designer. And here are the columns that we're seeing in the object structure. SQL, where are you? So let's take a look at these objects. They're my columns, so ID, created on, created by, modified on, modified by, and ACDM name. And ACDM name is this guy. We can obviously inspect the properties. You could see that it's a varchar of 250, and on this end, it simply says that it's a string. Now, it's a little deceiving because there's no such thing as a string. I think it's a typo of some sort. So technically it's text 250, but here for some reason it says string. So when you see it, just assume that it's a text 250. If you want to change it, go ahead and change it to text 250. It really makes no difference. Okay. So the next thing that we want to look at is what the other pages are. So the section is the one that's going to represent the other elements of the section itself. So which table we're going to be storing things in, whether or not approval is disallowed, whether or not we have multiple pages, which pages need to open up, as well as configure some of the dependencies for this specific module. The section representation is a little difficult at this point, so let's go to the more simple stuff. Let's take a look at the page itself. The page file is a JavaScript or JSON representation of the page. And this is what it looks like. This is basically the UI definition of everything that we need, everything that master has created. So it's got the page name, it's got some diffs basically for definition of the structure. So it's telling us that it's inserting some sort of a column name. It's giving us the coordinates of this column name, how big it is, etc., etc. And most importantly, it's telling us which data object to bind it to. Yep. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to exit this thing. I want to log back in. I want to go into my training session. And I want to, okay, so here's my expense request. Here's my under training workplace. There's my new section. It's already available for me. I can start creating new records. And when I do, the only thing I get here is the name. The name was the only table or the only basically field that was automatically created for us. So what we want to do at this point is we want to probably go ahead and start modifying this a little bit. I can exit this, click on the view, open Section Wizard. Section Wizard will take me back into what we went to originally. It just now it's going to know which ID of the section we're going to be applying. You could see that the ID is now created here in the URL of the page, and it's opening it to the expense report. So we're not recreating something, we're actually opening something for editing. Whatever information we're storing here in terms of the logo, in terms of the page settings, and in terms of the approval is going to be stored in that section file. But what we're interested in at this point is how we can play with the page. Here's our name column, and let's...
Can I just have a small note?
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit complicated here. I mean, in each page you can see multiple functionalities and rows and sections, and in each one either you click on it and there's another table drawing down. I mean, it's a little bit complicated to me at this stage. Is there any other way to make it more simple for us to adapt it faster?
No, not really, because if you're going to be creating your objects, you're going to need to change all those settings to fit your needs. What we're doing right now is we're going through the most basic stuff. We're not going to be writing any code. We're going to be doing everything with clicking and maybe naming things, but we're not going to be writing any code. It's not going to be, I don't think.
You mean like developing it?
Yes. So what we're doing here is we are creating a place for us to store some of our own stuff. Once we do that, and the reason I'm doing it through creation of our own object is so we are not bugged by all this other functionality that already exists on some of the pages. When we create a couple of fields here, we're going to go and modify another page that is already existing. So you can see the difference between modifying the new one or creating the new one versus modifying the existing.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so in terms of the fields that we can have on the page from the designer, they're all listed for us right here. We can also see the existing fields right here. We see the active processes created by, modified on and by. Those are the system fields. We probably shouldn't be needing them, but the name one is not. So let's rename that to an expense request name. So here we see that the title is name. I want to rename it to the expense request. I'm still going to keep ACDM name, which is data bound item in the database, but what I can change here is whether or not it's a required field or not. If it's a required field, then the user will not be able to save the record without actually providing some sort of a value there. If I uncheck the field to be required, then you can leave it blank. Okay. Let's add a couple of fields. Let's throw date. We're going to call it request date. Request date. Request date. And let's make it also a required field. Maybe we're going to provide some sort of a string for an explanation of what this is. So let's drag it here. Call it description. We can also expand it just to take more space. And if we go into the edit, what we have for string type objects is multi-line text. Multi-line text will allow us to grow or basically span more than one row at a time. So we can grow 2, 3, 5, whatever rows we want. So that's going to be a request date. Now what I want to do is I want to go and add maybe a couple of lookups. The lookup is a pointer to another table. So for example, I don't want to be creating a list of contacts or a list of accounts. I simply want to take them as an existing one. So what I want to do is I'm just going to go and drop a lookup, and I'm going to say that it's going to be my employee. Employee. I'm going to be using an existing lookup. The tricky part here is to choose the right one. Well, I'm going to be looking for contacts, for all my contacts. I'm not going to be restricting anything. I'm just going to simply look for contact. Now for advanced settings, we can set additional captions. We can make it read only or maybe add additional filters. But for now, we're just going to keep it as simple as it can get. Let's just save this. And for now, that should. Yep.
On this employee field, I saw there's a cascade connection.
Yes. That basically means that if it's a cascade deletion rule, right? So if I delete the parent, that the child also deleted.
Okay, good. Yeah. No orphan.
Yeah, so basically you preserve the referential integrity. Okay, so let's refresh our page. So everything was saved. Let's refresh our page. In the expense report, we can click on the new, and there is my new fields. They're already added for me, right? So everything is nice and easy. I can start filling them in. This is a required field. This is a date. Calendar automatically opens up. The description is a multi-spend, multi-line, so that works. And the employee, we could see that I already get a list of records. Now, what I may want to do is I may want to sort it. I'll show you how to sort it a little bit later. But for now, what I want to go over is what was done on the back end. And so to do that, let's grab that, go to /0/dev and review the changes that we've made. So first, on the object itself. In the object itself, a couple of columns were added. You may recall that I haven't refreshed this database yet. So you see, it used to be just ACDM name. Now, if I'm going to go and refresh this whole thing, refresh, where's it? So a bunch of new fields were added on the database. Now, if we're going to look at this field, the important one is lookup, right? So ACDM employee. It's of a type, it's a foreign key basically, right? So it's going to have an ID of the employee. So when we're storing something in this table, we're not storing the value, we're storing the ID. And when the system, the entity data model, when it pulls something by ID, it will bring the default display value. And that's why the default display value is important. So if you are going to look at the context, you will see that the full name is the display value, and that's what we're going to see. And that's why when we have that drop-down list, that was what we saw. This is where you would want to modify, right? Okay, so everything is done on this end. So let's take a look at what was modified on the page itself. The page will look a little bit different now because we've added a couple of elements. So previously we only had this ACDM name element, but then for every field that we dropped, its properties were added to the designer, and there they are. So it's not that scary. It's fairly straightforward, right? Okay, we're not going to be, I promise, we're not going to be going to the page at all. So the next thing that we probably want to do is when we're looking at the expense request right here, it doesn't look nice because we don't really have any columns. So what I want to do is to make sure that I'm going to go into my view and click select fields to display. Here I can either have it in the tile view where I can have multiple rows for one record, or I can have it in the list view. This is actually the functionality that's available on all views, and all list views. So let's switch to a list view and select a couple of objects or a couple of columns that I want to see. So I want to see the name. What did we call it? Expense request, that's the name of the report. Let's add it date, and maybe add an employee. Okay, so that's what I want to save for myself. And let's go and actually create first record. So the expense request, it's going to be request 1. The date is going to be, let it be today's date, and the employee, let it be me. In the description, first request. All right, here's my record. All I need to do is maybe add a description. So let's go and do that. Here, click plus, choose description, and maybe span it across the entire field. And now I have my fully functioning record. What's also interesting is when we come back here, we can set the request date to be an automatic field. We don't want it to be filled in maybe by hand. We will allow person to modify it, but what if, for example, we wanted to do an auto value of some sort here? So for that, we need to switch into this view, find that request date, switch to full settings, and then in the behavior, what we want to do is we want to choose the application level and choose the default value to be of variable. Just choose current date. When we do that, publish this element. The next time we're going to be creating a record, the current date is going to be populated to this object automatically, all without code. All right, everything is saved. I want to do exit the request. Control F5 to make sure I clear cache. So the new JavaScript gets pulled in. Let's create new request. And here's my request date, right? So it's automatically filled in for me. So it's a fairly straightforward process. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay, great. All right, let's go and add some placeholder right now for ourselves. So let's go back into request 1, go into view, open section wizard. And in section wizard, what I want to do is I want to set up some of the details or placeholder for some of the details that we're going to be storing values in. So I want to create a new tab. I'm going to call it details, or maybe financial details. And I'm going to click save. I can then rearrange them, save this again, and then we'll get to these details in just a bit. For now, what I want to do is I want to go into an existing section and show you how you can modify an existing section. So the approach is very, very similar. Just like we've been modifying something here in the expense report, we can also modify the same way in the account section, contact section, activities, etc., etc. It doesn't really matter. So let's go into the account section and we see our typical stuff. So whatever we've created in the past, so there's Toronto 1. And let's say that for this Toronto 1, I wanted not the industry, but maybe I want to rename code to be an accounts payable code, or maybe I want it to be something else. Maybe I want to add a column. So all I would need to do is when I'm here is to click on the view, open section wizard. The section wizard will now open me to a fully designed section. And here, just like I was doing in my own object, I can go and modify the existing ones. All right, so here's my section for the account page. So you could see that it's the accounts page. And there's a bunch of fields that's already added here. There's a bunch of tabs that's already added here. And there's a bunch of lookups and pretty much everything is configured. So if I simply wanted to go and change code to maybe accounting code, I could say that, and that's it. That's all would be needed of me. Contact page, maintenance, timeline, connected to, etc., etc. All these values are completely customizable by you right now. You can drag and drop fields that are available for you right here. You could see that you've got add new columns and you've got, excuse me, add existing columns. So if you wanted to grab an existing column, you just want to throw it somewhere on the tab. So let's go and create default address. There's going to be a new tab for us. And for default address, I'm going to create a new field group. A field group is something that we can collapse. I'm just going to call it default address again. You'll see what it is in just a minute. And then here, let's give it an address. Let's give it a country, city, and state. I think there is somewhere state, zip code, and state. State province, there. Okay, let's save this. Let's save all the changes. And let's refresh it. Control F5 in case of Chrome on Windows. There's my default address tab showing up. And there's my address, my city, country, state, zip code, etc., etc. So I can now start filling all that stuff in. Make sense, guys?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is the basic stuff that we can be adding to our tables, or basically to our objects. All these changes that we just made, so default address, address city, all these basically columns, they were, if we were to refresh this, you'd see that we've modified something on the account. We've modified the account page and the account object. Now the account object itself, we haven't really touched much. The columns were available to us, but it still created an empty merge. So it created the fact that we've changed it, but there's nothing really changing in it. So it's basically a wrapper at this point. But the account page itself, you'll see that the master or the wizard basically added all the information about the fields that we were adding. So they're all here. Basically, they're in a tab. So whatever we've added, you can go ahead and review what was added, but there's quite a lot of stuff here. We've added tabs, and inside the tab, we've added cities, etc., etc. So these are all our fields, right? So all this stuff is now recorded. Now, when we're going to be exporting this package and installing it, for example, if I were to click on my Academy.
May I interrupt here?
Pardon me?
May I interrupt here?
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it, but I actually do not understand anything from what you're saying. I am trying, but it's too complicated for us. I even checking with my colleagues. We are not on the same path here. I don't know what to do, but I think it's time for us to disconnect. I'm going to send an email for the project manager. I think we need to change the training session we are taking. I think the only thing that we need is the end user training. It's not the development and stuff like that.
Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Bye. Okay. So the only thing that's so Danilo, I think it's going to be just you and I at this point, since Hiba disconnected.
Yeah,
right.
I think so.
So I think they wanted just the end user. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So you're clear on all this stuff, right? So it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, no, it's straightforward. I have some questions, but I will look at the recording after this and make sure I have all the understanding before asking you some stupid questions.
No, that's okay. There's no such thing. You know what? Like, since it's just two of us, then we can just have a discussion rather than me trying to, say all the things that I wanted to say. So if you have questions, just so for better understanding, plus so that I get better too, just let me know what is it that you want to ask, and we'll talk about it right away.
Okay. Yeah, this is a stupid question probably, but I can see you have all those objects created in this screen.
Yes.
And when I look at my environment, I don't have all those created. I was.
What have you What have you done so far?
Not much. I was trying to reproduce what you have, but for example, I was trying to create the expense request.
Yes.
As well.
Mm-hmm.
But I was not able to find how did you?
Okay.
How did you create that workplace? Yeah.
Okay, you know what? Why don't I just, because it's important that you don't get bogged down on those little steps. So why don't you share your screen if you want, and we'll try to do it on your instance together in a minute. Would you like that?
Oh, this will be perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna stop sharing. I don't know how I do that. New share, no, stop share. So I'm stopping, and now you can share your screen, and I'll look into your screen. Okay, great.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, I can see your screen.
Good. So how can I move this? Oh, okay. So I was trying, let me close this one. Okay. So I was trying to create that workplace you created in here, the training one. I was not able to find it.
Okay, click on the cogwheel, scroll all the way down. Workplace setup under setup view.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, makes sense.
Click new. Let's create a new one.
Let's name it as you did.
Yeah, training.
Good.
Okay, click open. Yeah. Let's assign it to someone so that someone sees it. User groups. Give it all employees. Select. And close.
Close.
Yes.
Okay.
Now you need to log out and log back in. And I saw that you also registered for the dev, right? Today at 10 Eastern?
Yes, yes, I am.
You're going to be fried by the end of the day.
No, and by the end of the week.
Oh,
what
yeah.
do you say?
Okay, let's go into where it says general.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's your training.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So now there is nothing in a training. So what we need to do now is we need to create something to start using our expense report. So let's go into Cogwheel again. Now you see this little bell at the bottom with the number 3 in it? The orange one?
Yes.
Yeah, just click on it. Gives you more space. Okay. Go into the Cogwheel again. And let's go to Section Wizard.
Section Wizard.
Yep, you're right on it under System Setup. Hit Control F. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, I was going to hit Control F.
It's the easiest.
Yeah. It usually takes more time than
you know what, like yes, mine's localhost, right? I have SSD and everything is local. What's happening on your end is when we're issuing those demo stands, the density of those stands is much higher than the production version. Just because we're requesting them. So you end up with, let's say normally you wouldn't put more than 20 on that big server, but on the demo stands, maybe they'll put a little bit more, like 40 or 50, I don't know. So depending on how many people log on to those demo stands, sometimes it's flying, sometimes it's not so good.
Makes sense.
Now, since you're going to be doing a dev, I think the first order of business for you is going to be to set up your local environment. So you just probably want to download copy of this stuff, put up your own SQL, get your IIS going, and just have a local environment. And then in the dev, they'll show you today or tomorrow, I'm not sure when, how to set up SVN so you can move things around between the dev and the production. So you can use, let's say, this instance as your production and use your local host as your dev box, and you'll see how to set up SVNs to move things around, or use package import export, also acceptable option, especially if you're not working in teams. Jeez, yours taking really long time. Something is not right. Can you hit F12?
Say that again.
Can you press F12? And what's in the console? Any errors?
Yes. Connection reset.
Let's try reload this page. That's weird.
Yeah.
Huh. Hold on, let me try it on my end. Like, I just wonder if it's something on my end, on your end.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
No, it's fine. I'll just access it. Yours is accessible from the cloud.
Okay, good.
1, 2, 3.
Do you want the URL or?
No. I got it.
Okay. You know, I think Ed Eastman, he has a demo.
Yeah.
I think he has a demo environment, and he was setting a user so I can navigate on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Come on, where's my chat? Yeah, ad was in. I saw ad in my training a while back. I don't remember when it was. It was a while back.
Yeah, I heard he has some projects going on, so this is why he's pushing me to have these trainings.
Oh. So he's doing
That's
the
good.
sales, you're doing the dev work, huh?
Yeah.
Right.
Usually this is the way we did.
To each their own, right? Works.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me go section wizard. Man, opens right up for me.
Is there any IP restriction for this?
No, try Control F5 just to kind of refresh the cache altogether. But yeah, like I had no problem creating it. I didn't get any connection resets, nothing.
Now it's come. Yeah. It was a caching issue.
Okay. All right, so let's give it a title. Title is what you're going to be referring to. So like expense report will do.
Okay, expense report.
And here the full, like I would just basically get rid of white spaces. So USR expense report. Yeah. And a workplace, we choose training. Yeah. And then click on, yeah, you can change it, but you can change it later. It has to be 38 by 38.
Okay.
And then let's go to pages. Keep it one page for now. And let's go to...
Something went wrong here.
Oh, you've got the, you clicked on the browse, so it's probably opened up your, maybe on the other monitor if you have. No? It's thinking. Oh, that's weird.
It's stuck.
You clicked on this browse change picture, no? Or you didn't?
Yeah, I clicked on the menu icon here.
What if you just hit escape? Like maybe it will take us back. Huh. What's going on? So it's looking for file. Like I'm sure there's a file open window somewhere.
Okay. Let's check this. I'm gonna stop sharing for a while.
Yeah, sure, no problem.